It's Friday. Welcome to the Trent England Show. We are still outside up at the Capitol. The OEA threw in the towel last night, but there's still people up here. It's a much smaller party, but the party, they're trying to keep it going. It's like, it's like one of those college parties that people just, they want to just push it and keep it going maybe a little bit too long. We're going to wander around and talk to people up here and ask them, what are you doing and what do you think of the OEA that threw in the towel yesterday? They got all kinds of hate on social media yesterday. Not from people who were upset about the strike, but from people who were upset that the strike is not continuing. Of course, it's a fake strike. We keep pointing that out on the show. We don't have to do that anymore because it is basically over. There still are some schools that have to vote on whether they're going to come back on Monday. Everybody assumes that they will come back on Monday or I guess Tuesday. There are a lot of schools that are back today. The crazy thing about all this is some of the national media coverage, and we've been checking in with the national media coverage as this has gone along to see just how bogus and disingenuous it is. Today I saw the headline in the New York Times basically said that, teacher strike is ending after they won all these concessions. All the concessions, basically, with the exception of a couple of really small things, everything happened before the walkout, before the school shut down, before teachers were locked out of schools. I saw somebody pointing that out the other day. A lot of teachers regard this as a lockout. They wanted to go to work and they weren't allowed to, right? I mean, you could portray it as much as a lockout as you could as a strike, but whatever. The school shutdown is coming to a close. We still have a lot of people up here. Let's go find out why. Tell me, who are you? Where do you teach?
I am Shannon Kraft, and I teach at Stillwater Middle School.
So the OEA threw in the towel yesterday on the strike, but some folks, including you, are still out here. Why is that?
I didn't get the memo. I'm here for school funding, and when you start doing the math, I didn't know exactly where their math ended up. However, it wasn't about teacher raises. It was about making sure that our students have the funding. They set the budget. However, if you look at the numbers, we do not have the revenue, and that's what we're worried about. I'm here for my students. I'm here for my support staff. I'm here for all of Oklahoma. I'm a fourth-generation Oklahoman, and we need funding. It's very important.
So the revenue number, though, is really close on what they passed, right?
That's not a guarantee. Once again, that's why we're at where we're at. This has been 10 years, and we keep saying, "Oh, the revenue." No, that's an estimate. That's not a given. We need to make sure that we match. We need to make sure that all opportunities and avenues are opening so that basically we can keep teachers in this state, that we can have the best teachers supporting our educational goals, strategies, and that students have a future. Eventually, my grandchildren might be going through the system, and I want the best possible education that we can afford.
So are you going to be out next week?
We are in discussions right now talking about what we're going to do. So I think it's very important. Monday said they're back in session. And so they were not expecting us to be back, but I would like to be back because I'd like to meet with them again. I've been in and out of that Capitol this is my 10th day. I've been here every single day, and I will continue to do so as long as I can to fight for students' education.
So are you frustrated with the OEA's decision?
I'm like I said, this is my opinion. I didn't know that we were quitting, so that was a news update to me. I didn't understand that because I was every time that I get asked, I say I'll be here until we get that funding secured. And that's what we need to do. We need to get that funding secured. Not for just education also, let me just put it out there, for all services in Oklahoma. Health care. My dad is a retired fireman, so it's important that we are funded.
So you mentioned healthcare. One last question. Yes. The only reason the state doesn't have a surplus looking ahead to next year is because the health department and OHCA needed bailouts because of some misspending. I mean, is that frustrating to you?
I think that a lot of things are frustrating. Like I said, I'm a fourth generation Oklahoman. I didn't get us there. I go to work, I do my job, and so yes, there needs to be lots of things looked at. Let's fix it.
So tell me who you are and where do you teach?
I'm Garrett Huford. I teach biology at U.S. Grant High School.
So not too far from where I live. So tell folks, the OEA yesterday called all this off, but you're out here today. Why is that?
Because we're still in desperate need of funding, and it's just not something that has been accomplished by the legislature. And a lot of the teachers, myself included, want to show them that that's not okay.
So, I mean, you got the AFT shirt on. Of course, Oklahoma City is unionized by AFT, not by OEA. Do you sense that there's a difference of agreement there?
I think that because we're a smaller union, it's been easier for the individual members' voices to be heard. From the very beginning, AFT has said that we will decide when we go back, and because we are located here at the Capitol, I think it's easier for us to be here today. For OEA folks, they're a much larger union, so I don't know if it's a difference of opinion as much as it's just easier for our opinions to be heard.
So the legislature did pass almost $500 million, somewhere between $400 and $500 million in new revenue, and earmarked most of that to education. Why is that not? And that was all before the shutdown. Why is that not a good enough step? I mean, that comes really close to meeting the OEA's demands in the first year. I mean, why is it? Why I think a lot of people look at that and say, "Well, that's a pretty good compromise. You got almost everything that at least OEA wanted."
Well, I think it's several things. One is even with the full $450 million, we are still below 2008 levels of funding. So we don't have a full restoration of funding. On top of that, the legislature and the governor have repealed $50 million of that funding and only replaced it with about $45 million. And then a full third of it, $150 million, comes from cigarette taxes. And after year one, those will go to public health and not to education. So for the long term, this is not really a viable solution to our funding problems. Even in the short term, it's not enough money to hire any new teachers or even buy enough new textbooks to replace a lot of the aging ones we have in our classrooms.
Are you hoping for Oklahoma City to be out next week? Have you guys decided yet?
We have not decided yet. We're voting today. We'll know by this afternoon what the membership thinks, and the union will communicate that with the school board later this afternoon. It's a really tough decision. I think that there is definitely more that needs to be done. At this point, I think everyone is wondering whether or not us continuing to show up is going to have any impact on the legislature. I think that's a really open question after 10 days of very little movement and very large crowds.
Thank you so much.
All right.
So tell me, who are you and where do you teach?
My name is David Jewell. I teach at Yukon High School.
So the OEA sort of called all this off yesterday, but you're still here. Why is that?
I just want to see what's going on. The OEA is a professional organization, but it doesn't represent all the teachers. And so I wanted to see what other organizations like the AFT and some other organizations are doing.
So are you an OEA member?
Yeah, I am.
What have you been here multiple days?
Day 10.
Okay, so what do you? The legislature passed a big package before all this started, and then they adjusted some of that with the hotel motel tax and replacing it with other things. I mean, what do you think about what you've seen here over the last 10 days?
Well, a lot of thoughts come to mind. The hardest thing to remember as I teach government, people vote party lines, and unfortunately, compromise is not something in their vocabulary. And unfortunately, what you see is an increase in pay. Great. It's funding that we need as well. And nobody is willing to compromise on the Republican side, and the Democrats in the minority can't do anything about it.
So, so if you teach government, you know, right? I mean, voters in Oklahoma have heard over and over and over again, there's been all this polling and different campaigns and packages, and it's always focused on teacher pay. I think from the standpoint of a lot of legislators, they came to this big compromise. It's a big tax increase, so what would you say to legislators who feel like, man, we thought we did what they were asking?
Sure, yeah. If I had a chance to talk to legislators that were open and willing to have a conversation, I would tell them the following. We appreciate and we acknowledge that the raise was needed, and we couldn't be more thankful for it. However, they're missing the bigger picture. A $6,000 raise is great for all teachers. However, what you're missing is I got 39 kids in my first hour government class. I have 12-year-old textbooks, haven't changed. This is where we need long-term sustainable funding, and you can't remove stuff from the package you already passed. Hotel motel, that's $50 million that we missed. They try to replace with Amazon, they try to replace it with ball and dice. That's not going to bring in as much revenue as they expect. That's all subjective. Hotel motel would have been really helpful for us, but they just took it away, and I'm saddened by their actions.
So one of the other things that I know that some people, some Oklahoma taxpayers look at and they say, it depends on what district you're in, they say, our school buildings are Taj Mahals, right? They're the bond money, if you're in a district, is yours, yes. So what do you say to taxpayers who say, look, there is a lot of money in the system. Maybe we need to shift how some of that gets spent, and instead of doing so much in bonds, do some of that for operations. I mean, do you think that the legislature should be more innovative that way?
Well, I think anytime, they audit the schools every year, and the Department of Education every year, which I think is important. Bonds, I'm not an expert on bonds by any means. I do know UConn passed a bond issue a couple years ago and built a $90+ million school, which is great too as well, but we still have dilapidated textbooks and still have resources that are not as much as we would like. I love working in UConn, but something needs to change in the legislative side for us to be more competitive with regional areas, specifically states around our region, to keep our teachers. I mean, we hire 30 to 40 new teachers every year at UConn, and we're the third or fourth largest school in the state. There's a reason for that. And so I can't be an expert by any means on bond issues at all.
Well, thank you for what you do. Thanks for talking to us. So tell me, who are you and where do you teach?
I'm Misty Rapprich. I teach at Brink Junior High reading.
So your sign says OEA is not the boss of me. They threw in the towel on all this last night. You don't agree?
I do not agree.
What do you think their thinking is when they made that decision? I think a lot of people were surprised.
I was surprised. I don't know what their thinking was. The best I can figure is they thought to cut our losses and try to move on for another fight another day. I just don't feel like the work is done, so I'm here today.
What do you want to see the legislature do? I mean, they did pass a big package, a big teacher pay raise. What else do you want to see?
I would like for them to fully fund the first promise. That would be fantastic. We're still $30 million short. There's several ways that I've spoken to, particularly Mr. Eccles. There's several ways that they've proposed to go ahead and fill that. Past that, I'd like for them to continue to fund the promise beyond the first year. There's no money for year 2 and 3 and beyond that. So essentially, it's an unfunded mandate at this point, and our districts are overwrought with unfunded mandates at this point. It's really just going to put the pressure back on the individual districts. It's going to be really hard to retain teachers in Oklahoma after this.
But isn't that, I know I've heard people say that, but isn't that a little bit misleading because government only budgets 1 year at a time? So, I mean, technically, actually, teachers are the only people who have a pay raise funded into the next fiscal year. And when they pass the regular budget, then, everybody will be funded in the next fiscal year. But no government funding ever extends beyond the budget that they've written. I mean, isn't it fair for legislators to say, look, all this revenue is coming in, it's continuing revenue, even if we can't guarantee it, and legally they can't guarantee it for the second year, it's going to be coming into the state. The state has these obligations. I mean, any state employee could say that their pay is not funded beyond the current budget, right?
I think if we hadn't seen funding being taken back, even as late in the school year as January, we've seen budgets cut 100% for general funds. I think if the government had entrusted their goodwill, and if we had seen them do what they've promised in the past, there might be some belief that would continue. We already right now are seeing petitions to go back on what the original promise was. So you can say, oh, well, maybe they'll fund it next year. Hopefully they will, but we've been waiting for that for 10 years, and that hasn't happened, and that seems okay until the teachers stand up for themselves. So right now we want to get some insurance.
Okay, thank you so much. So tell me, who are you and where do you teach?
My name is Matt Grover. I teach at Monroney Middle School in Midwest City.
So your sign says, I hope your fallback job in November doesn't affect your ability to send your kids to private schools. That's directed to the legislature?
Yes, it is.
So why do you say that? Tell us.
Well, a big part of why they don't seem to care about what we're doing is that their kids aren't in public school. So this walkout doesn't really affect them. And without it affecting them, they're not going to care.
So what do you, I mean, I know some legislators homeschool, some have kids in private schools, some have kids in public schools. I mean, do you think it's a problem of caring or a problem of just politics? I mean, a lot of legislators have promised never to raise taxes, and that's how they got elected.
I think it's a little bit of both. Part of it's that they don't care. Part of it is politics, because a lot of them ran unopposed this past election, and now that people see the issues, they're not going to be running unopposed this November.
A lot of them do, though, win elections by telling people that they're going to hold the line on spending and hold the line on taxes. I mean, one question I've asked a lot of people is, I mean, how do you balance that when you go to meet with a legislator who's promised not to do that? You're basically asking them to break their promise, right?
Kind of, but with every rule, there are exceptions. And when hundreds of thousands of teachers across the nation agree with what we're saying, you might need to reevaluate what your previous thoughts were, because sometimes you're not always right, and it's not the case of breaking a promise. It's reevaluating where you're coming from and the way you see things, so that you can agree with the majority.
So, so the legislature did pass this big package before the school shutdown started, and they've adjusted it a little bit, but they're pretty close to where they started. What is it that would get you wanting to go back to school?
For me, it's the funding. They've been focusing more on teacher pay. Yes, they have said stuff about funding as well, but they've been focusing on teacher pay, and when they're not doing anything more, it's making teachers look bad, because we just look like we are going for more and more pay when that's not what we really want. Like for me, I need more desks in my classroom. I have textbooks in my classroom with the covers that I have to super glue back on because they're not there, and they've been the same textbooks since I was in middle school, and I'm a teacher now.
So I've got to ask this question. I mean, the OEA and their demands, they focused on teacher pay, right? That was the biggest item, and that's been the biggest talking point. And the legislature did that. Now the OEA has called it all off. I mean, do you feel like the OEA has played this wrong? Because it seems like they could have directed more of that funding and more of the conversation to some of these other things from the get-go.
Yes, I think the conversation largely was with teacher pay, and I think that's a problem because, like I said, teacher pay is not the thing that I really care about. Yes, don't get me wrong, I'm going to be okay with more money, but at the same time, funding is the biggest thing for me. And the way I see it is if we were going to stop the walkout this past we should have done it this past Monday when we didn't have to make up school days, because now I have to make up 5 school days with nothing really extra for this week to show for it. Yeah.
Are you guys going back to school next week?
Yes, we're going back to school Monday.
Thanks so much for talking to me. Okay, so tell me, who are you and where do you teach?
My name is Monique Ty. I teach at Millwood Public Schools in the Arts Academy. I am the president of the AFT union at our school. Next to me, go ahead.
Mrs. Vaughn, English, Millwood.
Cool. So we got a whole Millwood contingent. Let me just start with, are you guys going back next week? Do you know?
Actually, we have a different plan. We'll be at both places. We'll be up here and in school at the same time. So we have been working on this plan for quite a long time now, and it's important that we do have faces here, but then it's also important that we get our children ready together because we have something big planned.
Great. So what is it that, I mean, the legislature passed what to them seems like a really big package of tax increases, spending increases, most of it's earmarked to education. What else is it that you guys are up here asking for?
Well, we are asking for complete funding, but one of the things that's kind of a misconception is that this is all revenue based, and revenue can fail just like it has failed 2 years in a row. That got us into this situation. So nothing is actually guaranteed with what they passed. Oh, the rain's just kissing my face, right? So nothing is actually guaranteed with what they passed. And then also we have this new thing called the Oklahoma Anti-Tax Group that's actually trying to come and kill what was passed. So this is not a fight that was over just because the bills was passed. This is an ongoing fight.
Is the pay raise going to make it easier to retain and recruit teachers? You think that's going to be helpful?
Actually, no. And the reason why I say that is because it puts a lot of teachers in different tax brackets, so they'll be taxed at a different rate. And then on top of that, because we don't have all of this additional funding, we are more than likely going to end up spending that money that we got extra back into our classrooms. So at the end of the day, it's kind of a wash when you really look at it, because the real key is the funding for the classrooms. Sustainable funding for the classrooms. Are we going to do this again next year? Because a lot of these bills are not sustainable. It's just for 1 year only. So are we going to continue to strike every time we don't get the funding that we need? So it's not feasible for that to happen either. So
I mean, one of the things I've heard talking to a lot of people is folks don't trust the legislature, right? Folks are concerned that this is going to happen year after year. On the other hand, it's the legislature that has to make these decisions anyway. I mean, what is it that they could tell you that would satisfy you, or is that not really possible at this point with this legislature?
well, the first thing they can do is actually be a human being and stop being so obstinate and stop telling us what they are not going to do, what they're not going to listen to. That would be a step in the right direction, because when you are so hard-headed like that, there is no room for negotiation. So you just can't tell us what you are and what you are not going to do, and that we should be happy with that. But
I do think, though, I mean, from their perspective, because I talked to some legislators, I mean, they feel like they came to this big bipartisan almost consensus on the $450 million or so. I mean, that to them, it seems like a really big number. It's a big tax increase. They're getting, as you mentioned, they're getting a lot of blowback for that. I think a lot of them feel like from their perspective, they compromised.
they had to pass some type of revenue package. And of course, they have to pass something with education. So it's not like they just did this to appease us. They had to do it, and they had to do it by a certain time. So to say that they were listening to our needs, they just passed something that they had to do in the first place. Go ahead.
Something else that they really need to attend to, we had such a significant loss and lack. Though it seems like they've done a lot, if it won't bring us far enough to correct all of the deficit, then it is a step in the right direction. They just need to continue their work. So it's not that we don't acknowledge the significance of what they've done, but understand the deficit, okay? There needs to be more.
Anybody else want to add anything else? Because I think I've asked all my questions. Thank you all for talking to me, and thank you for coming out. You want a parting thought?
Parting thought. Oklahoma education is important. The students here are our future. We are already the laughingstock of the nation, and because our education is so poor. So when you fund education, you fund our students. The students is the key to the success of this state. We do not want to continue to be last in everything.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Okay, so you are an education student right now. Tell us who you are and where you're in school.
Well, I actually am in GCU finishing up my doctoral candidacy. I am going in defense actually this next month. I also work as an educator for a school system in Tulsa.
Okay, so you had some interactions with legislators this week, and how did that go?
I came up here actually really excited. I felt like they were really going to listen and hear the issues of concern we were having with educational funding. I had brought some pictures to show kind of what a classroom or reading resource room or a computer lab looks like before a teacher gets a hold of it, and to show the basic state funding versus once a teacher or an educator or a community gets together and volunteers and supports to make a difference, and how that's what really flourishes it with good books, good chairs, good lighting, and all the resources that we desperately need.
The legislature, though, did pass a pretty good raise, average $6,100. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I think that was a really good start, and I really feel like that they were moving in the right direction to do that. And what we were just requesting is not to just take care of teachers, but to also take care of our students and our parents and the constituents in which we serve.
So you mentioned you were a little frustrated with your legislative interactions. What are you doing?
So I came up here with really good ideas that I wanted to talk about, not just education, but I also wanted to talk about our economy and good ways where we could fund education and be very transparent, because I think our public really wants to know where are these funds that we are getting going. And then I also wanted to talk about the equality of services that we have that support our school systems, for mental health and safety and a lot of reasons, like, in relationship to that. Basically, I didn't get any of that information out to him. Instead, as soon as I introduced myself and explained that I was an educator who was also completing a doctorate degree, I was scoffed at, and I was told that I should probably consider in the state of Oklahoma just looking for a new career.
So you're doing that. You told me before we went on the before we started interviewing here.
Yes, so I officially today filed for a Oklahoma State Senator seat position in the Rogers-May County area.
So, I mean, one of the criticisms of a lot of legislators is that, and I think you raise a lot of really good points, but a criticism that you often hear is people talk about sort of waste, fraud, and abuse, right, and finding money through efficiencies. And obviously those are all good ideas. Everybody supports those things, but that's also why a lot of legislators talk about them versus raising taxes. I mean, what taxes would you raise to get that additional funding that everybody up here has been talking about for a couple weeks?
I do believe that we need to mildly look a little bit more at our GPT. Where we're not overtaxing those big businesses that aren't in some of the oil and gas industries that we've talked about. So we do need to look closer at that. I do not think that general taxing just the overall public is the grand answer here. And I definitely feel that we can do a better job at how we spend the money we're getting, but that's going to require a lot of transparency and a lot of legislation and dialogue taking place to see how we're doing that. I know a large question during this last 2 weeks was everybody thought the lottery was going to solve education. And then when they introduced the new ball and dice tax, everybody was just like, shaking their heads, not feeling that was an answer. But maybe if we had more transparency and dialogue and collaboration on how much funding we're actually getting in rather than saying probability funding, then we can address with real numbers. And if we're looking at real numbers and real data, that's when we can make some sound-minded decisions.
Thank you so much. Well, there you go. I predict that there's still going to be a little bit of this party still going on next week on Monday. I'm not sure if we'll be back up the Capitol with the Trent England Show or not, but we'll let you know either way. Obviously, our regular studio is just south of the state capitol. We broadcast from closer to the state capitol than any other media on a regular basis at the Trent England Show. That was true when we were on the radio. It's true now that we are on social media, Facebook, YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, and as always, our full archive at ocpathink.org. Go back, and if you didn't see the show from yesterday, I still think this was one of my favorite shows, even though we weren't up here at the Capitol, showing some of the luxe buildings that you find, not like the ones behind me, some of the Taj Mahal buildings that you find scattered around Oklahoma's local communities that happen to be public schools. And I think this is one of the most salient points. We talked about it with one of the teachers today. People see these buildings. People know there's a lot of money spent on public education in Oklahoma. The question is, how is it spent? Where does it go? And we saw, and look, I'm not here to make fun of anybody, but we saw when you see people make that transition from teacher to political candidate, all of a sudden, that's the conversation that they want to have. And driving that conversation back down to local school districts and transparency, that's a good conversation to have. I just wish the OEA would talk about it, right? They never want to talk at the OEA, or I think we can throw the AFT in there as well. They never want to talk about transparency. They never want to talk about how local money gets spent. They never want to talk about making those hard decisions at the local level. Maybe we don't put turf on the football field this year. Maybe we actually invest more in curriculum. Maybe we give teachers stipends to go out and buy some of that school supplies. Local districts, frankly, some of them do this. A lot of them could do this, and that's a conversation that we should have. Maybe the upside of what we've seen over the last 3 days of filing for office, particularly state legislative offices in Oklahoma, maybe the upside of all of that is going to be a more serious conversation among educators themselves about how public policy actually gets made, how public policy actually gets done, prioritizing funds. I mean, we got a little glimpse of what could be the outcome of all of that, or one outcome of all of that just a minute ago. I hope you enjoyed these last 2 weeks of the Trent England Show, most of the time up here at the Capitol. As always, send me your feedback, send me your thoughts, questions you want me to ask as we go around and interview people. We have a charter school trailblazer who's going to join me on the show in just a couple of weeks, about a week and a half. You won't want to miss that. He's had his charter school application rejected at the Oklahoma City Public School Board. He's going to go to the state board. This is a very innovative charter school plan. You're going to want to hear about that on the Trent England Show when we sit down with him in just about a week and a half. Thanks for watching the program this week. Have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday.